Well, as a youngster, I got involved in the outdoors when I went to secondary school. And a teacher there was very keen on walking in the Lake District. And he took a group of us out. And when I first saw the Lake District, I was amazed. Of course, I'd never seen it before. So I got hatched to the Lake District. And then later on, when I became a teacher, I did the same thing. I took kids out. And that was many years ago now. And, you know, some of those children respected it so much that they come and see me even now. And one of them, at least, is 65.
How old were you, Walt, when you went out for the first time? What was you, sort of 10, 11?
Well, I went, yes, I would be I'll be a bit more than that. Probably 13. I went hosteling for years. Yeah. I didn't start camping until, well, I started going much further afield.
How did you get involved in the writing side? Did that happen naturally as a teacher, or did that come later?
It just happened naturally. No, before I was a teacher, actually, I tried writing, but I didn't get anything published. But then later on, I forget exactly when, I published a story about an adventure that my father had as a seaman. He was on a ship which nearly sank, actually, but he got it back. And it made a good story, so I wrote that up, and that was published in a magazine which I think was called The Worldwide, something like that. And then I didn't do any more until, I think I was just about started teaching when I started to write. And fortunately, I was starting to climb in those days, and nobody knew about very few people knew about climbing. And I started writing about climbing and walking and so on. And I wrote my first book about the Lake District and about how to walk and climb and so on. And it just carried on from there, really. And eventually somebody came and said, you know, would I like to do a book on this and a book on that? And of course I said, yes. That's how it started. I met a lot of interesting people, all the Everesters and Duke of Edinburgh and people like that. I met them all.
You say that people were not writing so much about this stuff back then, so where did you get your stuff published?
In the first place, The Wide World, I think it was called. It was an adventure magazine. They did stories about all sorts of places. Yeah. And people just wrote in and they published them. And they paid you about 5 guineas or something for a long story.
What is it, Walt, about mountains? I mean, obviously your father was more of a seaman. What is it that drew you away from the sea to the mountains in particular?
I think it was the Lake District. And I started walking. I walked all the Lake District. And then I started climbing on outcrops, you know. And I wrote a book about the English outcrops, which was quite a startling book at the time because most people had ignored it, you know. Yeah. Stanage Edge and places like that. Sorry?
Why were they ignoring those places?
Well, the climbers weren't, but they weren't generally known. And so I wrote the book, and, you know, people said, oh, goodness me, you know. And they thought you had to go to the mountains to climb. But you didn't. You just had to go to an outcrop, you know. And so that was done. And then I got involved in I read somewhere about an outcrop near Shrewsbury. And I went there, and there were very few climbs done. A few had been done. And so some friends and I, we just messed about on it. And I wrote a book about it, a guidebook, And then, unfortunately, towards the end, I fell off. And it was a bad fall. It was 200 feet. And I was taken to hospital, of course. But I recovered from that. And eventually I started writing about travel. And one day a chap just rang up and said, "How would you like to go to New Zealand?" Things like that. And then I joined the travel association, which was professional travel writers. So not the one that you're talking about now, but it was a different one. Mostly journalists.
Yeah.
And I kept being invited by them, and I went to all sorts of places. I went to Peru and out in the east and India a lot. The whole of North Africa I did, and eventually, I set it into writing. And then I went to London one day to talk to a guy about a book I'd written, and which he was publishing. He was a fellow from now what? Oh, I know. It was the paperback group people, Penguin.
Yep.
And he said, "What about Chris Bonington's latest book?" And I said, "Oh, it's all right. It's not a bad book." Yeah, he said, "Chris is writing mostly about himself, of course." And I said, "Yeah, well, so he should. He did it." He said, "Why don't you do a book about Everest?" I said, "Oh, I never thought of it." "Oh, yeah," he said, "I tell you what, you think about it and do it." So I went out and I went to see my agent, who was in London. And as I met my agent, he grinned and he said, "That was a good deal you got." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You've guaranteed to write a book about Everest for Penguin." And I said, "Well, I haven't." He said, "Well, he's fixed up a deal, and if you don't sign it, you must be an idiot." And it was for several £1,000s advance. And I thought, well, gosh,
that was a lot of money in those days. I mean, what were we talking? 1960s, 70s?
Yeah, late 70s.
There's a lot of money back then.
Oh, it was. It was several £1,000s. I wrote it, and of course, I knew a lot of the Everesters, and I dug up a lot, and you learn all sorts of things. I bumped into Jack Longman one day in Ambleside, and he said, "Oh, come for a drink." So we went for a drink, and I said, I was doing the book, had he read it? He said, I had he read bits that I'd sent to him. Oh, yeah, he said, "I looked at those, they're all right." He said, "Of course, you didn't bring out the differences in our expedition." And he told me there was fantastic differences between those who were in the army and those who weren't in the army. He said it was two separate expeditions. I said, "Gosh, Jack." Anyway, I said, "You might be using that." "No," I said, "it's quite true." So you find that in the book, And all sorts of things like that. The book was published eventually. It was the last big book I wrote. And, I'd written about 15 books by that time. But when the book came out, I got a call from Italy. And they said, "Oh, you've been awarded a prize," which was about the best mountaineering book. I said, "Oh, good, very good." He said, "There's 5 people awarded it, but of the 5, they then choose which is the best of the 5, and you've won it."
Wow.
So good. They invited me over, and my wife and I went over to Trento in Italy, and I went in and we went to an upper room, and the place was humming with. There were dozens and dozens, there were hundreds of people there. But more than that, there were 3 radio companies and 2 television companies.
Oh, wow.
And it was obvious this was a much a much bigger prize than I thought, you know. And so they were lots of blurb, and I said a few words, and that was it. But I still got the prize. It's a lovely piece of beautiful rock, and coming out of it is a silver flower. It's a beautiful piece of work.
Why did you not continue to write?
Well, by that time, most of my attention was being taken up by Cicerone Press.
When did you start Cicerone?
Well, I started that a few years before as a sort of part-time thing, because we thought that the guidebooks were a bit expensive for the ordinary climber, you know. I think there were 17 and 6 each, which was a lot in those days. So we brought out some little guides that I think we charged 5 or 10, 8 shillings, something like that. And they seemed to take off fairly well, but not great. But they did take off, and eventually they started booming, and I had to set up a company and everything. And, you know, a lot of my attention was taken by that. And
were you writing those guides, Walt, or were you bringing in people?
Oh, I brought in everybody. No, I didn't write. I don't think I wrote. Oh, yes. No, I didn't write any. I don't think I wrote any. But later on, I contributed one or two, mainly about travelling abroad and things like that. You know.
Was Kev Reynolds one of your first authors?
Yeah, Kev was. Yeah, he's a good lad, Kev.
I was out walking with him on Thursday. He's in good shape. He was telling me a few stories about you. It's what made me think to ring you.
Yeah, I bet he did.
Yeah.
Oh well, I mean, there's a lot of things I haven't told you. You know, a lot of stories and things. But I mean, I used to go to the Alps quite a lot every year actually. And I climbed Blanc and Matterhorn and so on. You know, I climbed all those, and it was very good. But mainly, when I started with that professional writing group, I was invited to different places. But as I say, you know, like one night, a guy just rang me up and said, "How would you like to go to New Zealand?" I said, "Oh, that'd be a good idea." "All right." He said, "How will you go this weekend?"
Did you?
I said, "It's a bit soon."
Did you set up the Outdoor Writers Guild, didn't you?
Yes, a group of us were meeting in Harrogate, and it came about that the writers that were then milling about should form a group. So we formed the Outdoor Writers Group.
Was this before Cicerone was set up or after?
Oh yeah, before Cicerone. When Cicerone got to be, I thought it was too much for me, so I sold it. It's doing very well now, yes. Of course, it's a different method now. It's a different way of printing and everything. Oh yes, he's got hundreds of books now.
Do you miss? Did you ever regret selling Cicerone, or were you? Did it allow you to get? What did you do once you sold it? What did you do after that?
Nothing.
Were you retired by then?
I was. Yes, I was. I must have been 70 odd when I sold it.
Oh, how old are you now then?
Have a guess.
I don't know. I thought you were about 70 now.
Oh, you're a bit out, mate.
Yeah, I've no idea how old you are.
88.
Oh wow. What advice would you give to a young writer like yourself?
Don't miss anything.
Yeah.
It's. I suppose it's an old. It's like a reporter's acumen, you know what's coming up and so on.
You sound like a reporter. Were you ever a reporter?
Not really. No, I was never. I wrote for several local newspapers, but I wasn't a reporter. No, I didn't go after stories. You know, they didn't send me for things or anything like that. I just contributed what I'd written. And that was mainly for the press in Wolverhampton, where I used to live at one time.
I see.
Don't miss anything. keep your ears open and pick up something that nobody else is thinking about and see what you can do with it. And you may succeed.
Yeah. Are you a good listener then?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you ever...
But it's mainly little things that pass between people, you know. Somebody will say something and you think, oh, that's interesting. And you won't tell them, but you'll investigate it.